the head of the Wagner group has just dropped another video, and he's offering to equip a 1,000,000-man army in exchange for some artillery rounds. What does it mean for the war effort and for the Wagner group? We are going to be breaking it down right now. But first, as always, guys, you know I got booted off Patreon. The number one way to support what I do is at combatvetnews.com. This has, for free, all the news stories I can't get to on the daily updates, all my YouTube videos for free. But if you want to support the channel, support what I do every day, the best way is to become a member. Any tier is going to get you access to the members only content where we do all the war footage breakdowns of the stuff that YouTube will not let me show you. Just last Friday, we looked at some GoPro trench clearing footage that really looks like something out of World War I. It's unbelievable, and it gave us real insight into how this war fighting is actually happening. Anyway, definitely please combatvetnews.com if you want to support me. Okay, let's talk about Prigozhin.
Сегодня 1 мая, 14 часов 30 минут. Наилучшее место, откуда можно поздравить с праздником международной солидарности трудяг.
Okay, so he's talking about the fact that May 1st is May Day. This is International Labor Solidarity Day. This is one of a communist holiday. I mean, that's not. Yeah, it's a generally like communist socialist holiday, but the point is it's considered a big deal in post-Soviet countries or post-Soviet Russia. In Russia, May Day was considered huge. Here you go, International Workers' Day, also called May Day, right? It's also concurs with a international like a spring festival, but it's when the Marxist International Socialist Congress met in Paris and established the what they call the Second International, well, so basically a global socialist effort. And when the Soviets took over, or the Bolsheviks rather, took over Russia, they considered themselves the bellwether and the standard bearer for international Marxism. So it became the International Marxist Socialist Congress became a puppet for most of the 20th century of Soviet efforts to increase really their international prestige. And while they sort of ostensibly were pushing communism, they were really just engaging in very pragmatic empire building that every state, regardless of ideology, engages in to some degree or another. So it's a so the fact that Prigozhin is shouting this out is really seen as a reference to Russian nationalism. It's an appeal to a major holiday from the Soviet times.
Это город Солидар. За нами завод.
So I want to point some things out about his outfit. Not an accident. You notice he's not wearing a uniform, but he is wearing a plate carrier with no side plates, which always bothers me. And he even has mags in it. So it's sort of implied that he is in some way, shape, or form in some sort of like combat environment. And he really is in Soledar, right? Like this looks like he's really in Soledar. And Soledar is not that far from the front lines at this point. Only recently did it fall into Russian hands. We can see on the map here that Soledar, right, it is just up here. So even if this is filmed right in this area here, he's maybe looks like potentially 4 or 5 kilometers from the front line. Very close for a very, very sought after VIP. Someone Ukraine would definitely happily, trying to think of the non-demonetized word here, render unable to continue to function.
Науф Солидарский, на фоне которого лучше всего сказать «Мир, труд, май». С днем рождения. И компанию с днем рождения. А если компании суждено пережить день смерти, то это...
Right. So this is again a sort of wink and a nod reference to the Wagner PMC, his company, right? So just like May Day is a day celebrating the work of laborers in industry, so he is sort of tongue-in-cheek celebrating the labor and industry that he is in, namely the private military industry.
Будет не от
And this,
украинской армии, не от НАТО.
he acknowledges that if he fails, it's not going to be because of the Ukrainian army or NATO, which makes you wonder who's out there, the Wagner Group isn't exactly taking these casualties because of trip and fall accidents, you know what I mean? But no, he blames the bureaucrats. And this is actually a pretty common refrain. The U.S., for example, after Vietnam, blamed heavily the political leadership of the United States for being unable to win in Vietnam. Though it's worth noting that the French tried and failed to establish a peaceful, unified rule over Vietnam. The Japanese tried and failed to establish a peaceful rule over Vietnam. And then the U.S. tried and failed to establish a peaceful rule over Vietnam. So I think it's fair so sometimes people will blame inward because the idea that your military just wasn't that effective, that your soldiers just were fighting a pointless, stupid war with every disadvantage stacked against them that can be tough to stomach for warfighters. And the truth is that you shouldn't fight a war you can't win. And if the politicians are saying that no, you can win this war, then yeah, maybe they do deserve the blame.
Наших внутренних подонков-бюрократов.
So actually, maybe spot on. This is an interesting scene. Just watch it. So this is what makes it interesting is, of course, that this is some sort of like staged event. Obviously, you could see he's got this buddy here, but you can see he's getting out. They both have their plate carriers. This is pretty common. VIPs almost always have a guard, and even brigade level commanders when they would visit. They would have their protective security detail, but there would usually be a super highly trained, like a former Delta Force guy or something who would be his immediately adjacent bodyguard. And this bodyguard would do exactly what this dude's doing, actually. You notice he got out. The first thing he was doing was looking to the sky to see if there were drones that had either followed the car, to see if there was any observation, again, of this VIP target. You notice, too, I want to point this out, Prigozhin's armed. While he has this plate carrier with AK mags, AK-74 mags, it looks like, but he actually has a pistol here under his plate carrier, which is not where that goes. But again, if you're a visitor to the front lines, you're not going to have a plate carrier set up to your way, to your liking. So it's very telling, and I don't think this is an accident. This seems like a pretty staged, managed event.
Показываю сокровища солидарских складов, которые длительное время хранились, перебирались, упаковывались и все остальное. Начинаем, наше шоу. Вот смотрите. Вот это вот все новенькое в солидарских складах. Шутка, это мне приятель чеченец подарил.
Okay, this is funny. And it's a subtle reference, right? It's kind of a fun joke. He pulls out a super modern, super good looking, looks like an AK, maybe like a AK-101 or something, or maybe a 74, but with just like an Escape from Tarkov level of weapon engineering. That's an aftermarket pistol grip. That is an aftermarket adjustable stock. It's got an EO tech mounted to what looks like a B-16 style weapon mount. It's got a suppressor on there, and it looks like some kind of aftermarket gas tube. So this is a super high-end rifle. And he's joking around. He says he was given this by a Chechen mate, which may be a subtle dig at Kadyrov, the Chechen dictator.
Итак, вот это Томпсоны. Вот этих Томпсонов у меня десятки тысяч. Новые в масле, упаковочные листы украинцы проверяют.
So, you're probably thinking to yourself, what on earth am I looking at? Tens of thousands of Thompson submachine guns? Yes. What this is, so during the Soviet Union era, let's see if I can get you some numbers. Okay, so during the Soviet era, the Soviets basically were like, the best way to think of it is like traumatized by the First World War. The Second World War. The Second World War was so brutal to the Soviet Union, it pushed the country to the absolute limit. And while it had manpower, it struggled immensely to equip its forces, a little bit like today. And so to ensure during the Cold War that this didn't happen, the Soviets resolved that they would never be caught flat-footed logistically again. And so they began to produce, and they would come up with these simple designs, not very complicated, basically slight updates from World War II level technology. But what they did is they mass produced it, figured out ways to store it, put it in long-term storage all over the Soviet Union, including in warehouses and caves in Soledar. Again, the idea was that even if major areas would be destroyed in, say, a nuclear conflict, right, you could raise an army with just some of these depots. And as you can see, they relied heavily on very, very simple designs. Makarov pistols. If you ever used a Makarov, it's so simple. AK 47 and 74 and AKM rifles. Dragunovs, again, all of these heavily parts interchangeable, very simple to manufacture. And it was really one of the things that sort of defined the Soviet Union was the idea of the massed conscript army, that they would raise these armies, equip them from pre-existing stores that were everywhere, basically. And that they would use them to fight NATO forces, NATO forces relied, again, on ultra high-tech, but highly trained, specialized forces. It's very much like the conflict is playing out now. But these Thompson submachine guns seem like they are probably either copies or were Thompsons that were provided during the Second World War and were simply sealed up and not used. That's my thesis. But they've been checked again. You can see, right, again, these are very old school machine guns, but they are still in storage, still in operation. The Soviets, if you've ever bought Soviet surplus, they relied on a preservative oil called cosmoline. It feels like just tons of Vaseline. And what they would do is basically slather the entire weapon. Every surface that was exposed to air was covered in cosmoline so that nothing could oxidize. And that's what we're seeing here. Again, they're put in these caves because they're climate controlled. Right?
Предлагаю вывесить объявление на Авито. Меняю вооружение на...
So Avito is like the eBay of Russia. So you could tell he's being sarcastic here. He's saying, I'm going to put a listing on eBay and I'm going to sell these weapons, which are sufficient for a 1 million-man army. He may not be wrong. This may be enough sufficient basic equipment for 1 million people. Okay, it's kind of hard to imagine having 1 million in there, but it's possible, man.
Армию в 1 миллион человек на боеприпасы артиллерийские для ближнего боя.
And he says, I just want 300 tons a day of, he's describing artillery. And if you you've been on the channel, you know that Prigozhin has been complaining for a long time about his Wagner group getting insufficient artillery support. Right? They don't get what he deems sufficient allocation of shells. And that's because Wagner is a light infantry formation at its core, but Russian doctrine says that light infantry, especially low-skilled light infantry, they need a lot of fire support. They need a lot of indirect fire. And artillery is the secret to doing that. It's how they've been able to take Bakhmut, by simply relying on indirect fire from tanks, thermobaric rockets, and artillery and mortars to basically flatten these blocks so that when the infantry advances, they advance into rubble, but rubble that the Ukrainians have already deserted.
Тонн в сутки. Артиллерийских боеприпасов и боеприпасов ближнего боя 300 тонн в сутки – это 10 загруженных контейнеров. Это очень немного. Если мы возьмем условную 30-тысячную группировку, 300 тонн в сутки артиллерийских припасов, которые требуются, 10 килограмм на человека в день.
Yeah, a hypothetical army force of 30,000. That's probably in the ballpark of Wagner's actual number. And so he's trying to, again, just beg his way to more artillery. And this is part of the Prigozhin social media influence. And because what you have in this conflict, especially within Russia, is the prominence of social media, right? There's sort of two ways to think about how this works. One is a patronage system. If you're Prigozhin or another power broker, right, everyone looks up everyone looks up the food chain to someone more powerful. And when you're Prigozhin, there's not that many power brokers. There's basically the head of the Russian Ministry of Defense. There's a few other mega power brokers at the Kremlin, and there's Big Daddy Putin himself. And for patronage, right, you want one of those people to view themselves as your ally and be supporting your efforts. And of course, in turn, you have to support them, your patron. But in the era of social media, things also work the other way, because the one thing the dictator fears is the people. And that's not just like a truism. It's an actual worry that if enough people no longer support the current strongman, then a new strongman with more popular support will be able to challenge their authority. And so what you have is this situation where not only are people looking up for patronage, but they are starting to look down, and they're looking at masses of people. They want followers, but more than followers, they want rabid fans. Again, Prigozhin's audience, like Igor Girkin and other mill bloggers, they are looking for to generate sympathy, empathy, and connection with a certain type of Russian. And that's why he's at the front line, looking geared, touring areas very near the front. I've never seen Prigozhin in a suit in my entire life. Putin, in contrast, right, is staying in opulent Kremlin areas. Putin is probably too sick and weak to make these sort of journeys. And Prigozhin is exploiting that. He's depicting himself as a rugged, practical, dogged fighter for his people. And to a certain type of person, especially like a kind of pro-military Russian nationalist, this looks like leadership. And honestly, it is. I'm not going to, the Wagner group are almost certainly war criminals. They are comprised largely of regular criminals. But part of leadership means going to bat for your guys. And if going to bat means publicly shaming the Russian MOD so you get ammunition, and I get it. He's looking out for number one by doing this, because when Wagner succeeds, Prigozhin succeeds. But all of those things aside, it's not cap. He's out here shaming the Russian Ministry of Defense, shaming Putin, shaming the leadership at the Kremlin, who are sitting in their like Kremlin palaces doing nothing, by going to the front lines, recording a video, trying to, in desperation, to get his troops some ammunition. It's real leadership. I mean, again, he learned it probably in Russian prison. You know, this is the kind of shit that builds, you know, if you need a gang of you know, sicarios or lieutenants, like, I don't know, this is how you get it, by being a good leadership and going to bat hard for your guys. So, but this is more than that. This is being seen publicly being a good leader, which is, again, good leaders end up being seen publicly being good leaders because they're good all the time. Bad leaders love being seen publicly doing good leadership stuff, but then when the eyes are off of them, they're back to being dirtbags.
Нам дают не более 1/3.
So anyway, guys, I hope you got some insight into this whole situation here, because it's wild, obviously. Prigozhin is a complicated guy. He's playing a deep Russian political game. And we, as English speakers, lose something. And as someone who really isn't party to like the deepest parts of the Kremlin politics, we don't see there's also pictures that we don't see. Anyway, guys, thank you so much. Thanks to all our lieutenant tier members on combatvetnews.com. I love you guys. Thank you so much. Thanks to our colonel tier members, though. You guys are the real champs. Your support really is what enables me to do this. Thank you so much. I'll see you guys in the next one.